Hello and welcome to Tech TV's first program about data and its incredible importance in this world that we're now in. Joining me in the studio are going to be Lord Clement Jones and Nicky Stewart. But before that, I'm going to have a little chat with Bill Mew, who is our studio engineer who is flying this entire thing from Portugal. We're doing this remotely just to show how you can use technology in this day and age. Bill, data sovereignty, what is it?
Well, data sovereignty isn't a new issue. I'm showing at the moment an article I wrote back in 2017, warning of the dangers of the US Cloud Act at the time that it was introduced. And obviously, this has been something that has actually had a massive impact on the cloud market and the players. And there's been an ongoing rivalry between the local UK and European players and many of those international giants that currently dominate the market, where much of the discussion has been around the level of sovereignty that they provide. The thing that brings this to the fore at this moment in time is very recently Microsoft has admitted that they cannot provide the protection, something that I think many of the European and UK players would have said all along, and that therefore we have a real issue around how any guarantees can be applied in terms of data sovereignty. Now, we saw this play out with the cloud market, and Nicky Stewart, who's joining us today, and myself were both employees of UK Cloud, which is the largest sovereign cloud provider in the UK. But during that era, there was a lack of investment and a lack of prioritization on data sovereignty, and players like that have actually now gone to the wall, and the market is dominated by the big giant US cloud providers. The concern is, as we move to AI, what is going to play out, who is going to control the AI infrastructure, and where are we going to stand? So hopefully, Pete, this is going to provide you with fertile grounds for discussion today.
Good. Well, let's open that up then. I mean, and let's actually put this into perspective, because people talk about things like the cloud. They talk about things like data, and everybody thinks, oh, well, it doesn't matter. I'll just tick the box. Lord Clement Jones, why is data sovereignty an issue? What is it about data sovereignty that is really exciting people at the moment?
Well, a great deal of this is about personal privacy. I mean, if you, and it's interesting what Bill said, because it isn't just on the continent that there's an issue with Microsoft. You know, the Scottish police found that they couldn't guarantee, that Microsoft couldn't guarantee to them that data about criminals and crime prevention couldn't be, if you like, exported to the States or retained in the States and be subject to the Cloud Act. So this idea that, your data can be kind of kept in the States and transmitted across borders, is a direct violation of your personal privacy in that sense. And I think that's where most people are nervous. It can be worked on, even if, it's not sensitive, like as sensitive as criminal information, but it's still your personal data. And let's face it, we know how, surveillance capitalism, as Shoshana Zuboff described it, works. Effectively, you are the product. You are, advertising is focused on you algorithmically, using your own personal data. And, what you're doing is you're giving potentially an advantage to those who hold that data. And if that data, is held abroad, you have no sovereign data advantage. And, I entirely agree with Bill. I'm, been following this for quite some time, and I've been interrogating the government, but they seem oblivious to the desirability of having sovereign cloud capability. Unlike the EU, which at least has been conscious about these issues, the UK seems just simply to, think it's a great idea to have the civil service use US cloud services. They, don't seem to be concerned about anything but foreign investment. That's for them is their sovereign capability of having people invest in the UK. So I think we've got quite a long way to go. I mean, there are one or two small areas like data communities and data intermediaries where government seems to have some idea, and maybe in due course the CMA will have something to say about it in terms of our competition law, but it's a pretty gloomy forecast at the moment.
Okay, well, Nicky, how's this happened? I mean, you're an expert on the cloud. How is it that my data has sort of evaporated and seems to have been porting its way over to the Atlantic?
So I think we've all walked into the cloud. And I think our sort of confession time many years ago, I was in the cabinet office leading a commercial work stream, which was effectively looking at how could the UK public sector buy cloud in a way that was compliant with the procurement regulations, because cloud and procurement regulations make for uneasy bedfellows at the best of time. And at the time, we all saw cloud as being the silver bullet solution to the problems that the government and the public sector was having with its incumbent SI suppliers, where they were, locking government down into very long-term, very expensive, very difficult to leave contracts. And cloud was effectively being marketed as the polar opposite of that. Effectively, you paid for what you use when you need it, and if you don't need it, you can just switch it off and off you go. And that was a huge amount of naivety, really. But cloud was seen as the silver bullet. There was a huge push for digital transformation, in public and private services. Cloud was seen as being foundational to all of that, as indeed it was. And I'm not here to say that cloud is a bad thing, far from it. That, cloud has enabled many really good things that are beneficial to citizens and taxpayers, but the risks weren't fully understood. So, the issues that the CMA has been looking at for the last couple of years, lack of technical interoperability, the kind of commercial incentives that are being used in some cloud providers' cases, questionable software licensing practices have all sought to catch people pretty much unawares. And in fact, only I think it was last month, this government published its list of chronic risks. And dependency on too few digital providers was one of them, where it actually says that 70 to 90% of the UK cloud market is now rested in only two providers. And that kind of brings you on to, I think, broader questions. So yes, that there is, I think, a much more acute awareness of the risks of that kind of concentration, and particularly the issues around data sovereignty in the EU. And there are, a number of initiatives springing up to attempt to address that, and we can come back to those. But here in the UK, there seems to be almost a kind of complacency, because if you look at the chronic risk analysis, and there it is in black and white, yeah, our dependency on these digital platform providers is a chronic risk. What are we going to do about it? We might introduce some competitive procedures, and the CMA is looking at it, and that's probably not good enough.
Okay, so what does this mean to the individual then? I mean, we're talking about the CMA, we're talking about government organisations, we're talking about this as a government issue, but it's a fundamental issue for people, isn't it, Tim?
Yes, absolutely. And I mentioned the question of data privacy and so on earlier on, but also, if you have data communities, data intermediaries, which you were very much encouraging, where organizations, communities, groups can pool their data and use them, and they could be proprietary, they could be monetized by, for instance, new AI models being developed. There is potential there economically for communities, but they can't do that unless we have the right kind of cloud services, in my view.
Mm.
You have to have that kind of cloud sovereignty, which I don't think this government really has acknowledged at all. And I'm very interested to hear of Nicky's experience in the Cabinet Office, because, my sense is that, even though this issue has been raised on multiple occasions, we still haven't got the right kind of procurement arrangements in government to make sure that they are looking, at domestic suppliers, particularly in this area. And of course, we all know the experience of some UK cloud service providers that didn't get government support, and as a result, did not succeed and actually went bust at the end of the day. So, there's a very sad story involved in UK cloud services, which concerns all those of us who want to see, a UK a set of services without being dependent on the US. And of course, what you haven't mentioned so far, Pete, is this extraordinary new US executive order, which really emphasizes, as far as the US is concerned, they want total dominance in the technology field, which includes AI, cloud, what they describe as the full technology stack. And that, has huge implications both for us and also, European countries in the EU as well.
There you go. You just stolen my next question, Tim. Right. I mean, that's one of the points, isn't it, Nicky? One of the points about this is a lot of people are saying, hang on, there is some naivety in government. The government doesn't see, we look at things like the Horizon scandal with the post office, and people are thinking, the government doesn't seem to be across technology, and this is coming from a government. Let's face it, and we had a gentleman called Alan Turing who actually started off a lot of this in the first place. We seem to have lost quite a substantial lead. Trump is talking about developing this homegrown industry. Surely we need to develop a homegrown industry.
We certainly need to support challenger cloud providers, not least of which is because cloud is going to be foundational to AI, to quantum computing, and all the new cutting edge technologies which are coming out, which are going to be huge game changing markets. And you're right, this government is absolutely not across it. So let's just take a look at the history of cloud consumption in the public sector, because the data is relatively easy to access. To date, based on Cabinet Office figures, over 14 billion has been spent on cloud and cloud-related services. Absolutely none of that has been competed. None of it has been subject to any form of competitive process. Because it's gone through a vehicle called G-Cloud, which relies on a direct award process. At the same time, government has been locking itself into long-term deals where they get preferential pricing in return for certain volume commitments, and that preferential pricing, the discount increases the more they consume. And there's always, a conflict between officials who are completely cash strapped, who are being asked to do incredibly challenging things, but they've got themselves into a complete mess. And in fact, there's been quite a lot of parliamentary scrutiny of government's relationship with its digital vendors, not least because the NAO issued an insight report earlier on this year. And we had some very senior DSIP officials up in front of the PAC recently who were kind of, yes, of course, just spiraling out of control. Yes, we've got no leverage over our principal digital vendors, but we have no choice. And that is absolutely where we're going wrong here. And, I represent the Open Cloud Coalition. The Open Cloud Coalition is here to say, yes, you have a choice and you must give yourselves a choice. And the only way you're going to do that is by putting competitive pressure back into this market, because it's almost non-existent at the moment.
Okay, Tim, how do we go about this? Ages ago, I interviewed a top intelligence officer who told me that he'd presented a paper to the Ministry of Defence, I think it was in 1996, where he was calling for borders in cyberspace. Everybody told him that he was silly. They were saying that's impossible. You can't possibly do that. But in a sense, we do need to do that, don't we? Because what's happening is your data, my data, everyone's data is going all over the place. Microsoft has said just recently that it can't guarantee that your data is going to stay in any one particular place. How are we going to do this?
Well, I absolutely agree, Pete. The trouble is, it's not just data, it is the full stack, effectively, because I do think that, cloud services and data are foundational, but then, you look at dependence in other areas. I mean, for instance, the civil service is developing this suite of products called Humphrey. Well, you look underneath the bonnet and you find that actually most of them are being built on the large language models like OpenAI. You look at most of the new developments in other areas. The relationship is with Microsoft using their Copilot. You look at the cloud services that are being provided and the AI development tools, AWS. So, they're all the big, what they call hyperscalers, which are being depended on. And, we've seen what happened. You saw that the senior judge in the ICJ, in the International Court of Justice, Microsoft basically said that they couldn't supply him any longer with their Outlook email account. Well, that demonstrates the power of big tech in the face of, pressure on them. And so, for a senior official in an important international organization to be picked off by like that, I mean, is a harbinger of what could happen in the UK government, for instance. What if the US seriously objected to something? Well, they would put pressure on Microsoft. They could terminate the use of the Office suite in government, for instance, as simple as that. Now, I'm not saying that's, a near-term thing. It depends on the relationship, no doubt, at any particular moment with the US government. But, directly, the US government are trying to get dominance in this area, and they've already got a huge amount of it, but they're trying to get even more dominance, which puts us at particular risk in terms of our use of nothing but big tech. And, that seriously worries me. And that's why I'm a big fan, and this is another subject probably, of open source, because we need to have access to the source codes and so on in order not to be vulnerable. We need to have our data held in the UK in order not to be vulnerable. And we need to have our own cloud services, domestic sovereign cloud services, in order not to be vulnerable. If everything's held in a data center in North Virginia, then we're in real trouble.
I mean, this is one of the things, isn't it, Nicky? People are talking about Brexit. They're talking about Britain regaining its borders and all of these things. At one point, what made Britain great was that loads and loads of trade went through Liverpool. 70% of the world's data now goes through North Virginia. And one of the reasons why that's important is because that data can be used to train AI. Isn't that the point?
Correct. And there is, amongst the tech giants, a real battle going on now for control of this arena, under that extraordinary executive order. I think if you come back to the kind of different responses, for example, that the EU is having to these issues versus the, if you like, the almost lack of response in the UK, where you look at the AI opportunities plan, for example, and it mentions sovereign AI, but then it goes on to say, but don't worry, you big tech giants, you'll get most of it, and there'll just be a little bit for the UK providers. Part of the problem here, I think, is that sovereign is not a defined term in any sense. So you can have sovereign, which is data residency, so the data can be, for example, held in the UK, or you can go through to some of what might be perceived to be extreme hardline sort of positions, like for example that Eurostack is taking in the EU, which is kind of give preferential treatment to EU providers. And oh, by the way, we'll need a 300 billion euro investment to realise a full digital stack for Europe. There's got to be a middle way here, and for the OCC, the Open Cloud Coalition, it comes back to choice. And it comes back to officials, politicians, decision makers, body swerving the whole thing because they don't believe they have a choice in the UK, and they've partly disempowered themselves through Brexit. They don't want to have a discussion about Brexit particularly. So there is a kind of case for greater dependency on the US, but unless they start supporting challenger cloud providers, challenger AI providers by giving the right messages to the industry, because we hear a lot about the investments, for example, that Microsoft was making in AI. That was a Rishi Sunak thing, where it was 500 billion, I think, that was coming into the UK. That was effectively for building a data center. Now, once that data center is built, right, the jobs are going to be very few. It doesn't take many people to run a data center, and most of that economic benefit is going offshore. Whereas collectively, so I look at the membership of the OCC, which does include global US people, but and European members and UK members. Collectively, they could make as great, if not an even bigger investment into the UK. But many of them aren't because they're simply not getting the right signals from government. And for many of them, whatever the Competition and Markets Authority says in its final decision, which is absolutely imminent, won't be any later than next Monday, will be absolutely key to how they view the sort of viability of the UK as market. Because at the moment, there is no competition, therefore digital growth is very limited, and digital growth is kind of predicated and assumed to be on US players. And we've got to change the dynamic there, and we've got to do it very quickly.
Well, there's a terrible lack of ambition here, isn't there? One of the things about all of this is we're talking about the future. We're talking about all of our futures. We're talking about the future economics. We're talking about whether we have a stake in the future. What we're sort of saying is, should we allow Microsoft to invite us into their future? Can we make a separate future? One of the most interesting things about data sovereignty is there are these industries that are growing that are saying we can actually say where your data is. They're trying to actually say to their customers, yes, you comply with GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations. But sorry, Tim, that's something we need to do, isn't it? This is not a question of us just throwing our hands up in the air and saying there's no way we can compete with these massive companies. Surely this is our future.
I entirely agree, Pete. And it's very interesting. I mean, Nicky's talked about the AI opportunities plan, but actually it's not joined up. When you look at what government's doing, I mean, they're putting a lot of money into what supercomputers or whatever you might call them nowadays, exacompute at Cambridge, Bristol, Edinburgh, and so on. But what are they going to be using for data? What AI models are going to be trained on them? There's a sovereign AI unit in DCIT. What are they meant to be doing? I mean, this kind of lack of understanding. I mean, it's really interesting that the White House document talks about the full technology stack, because that's exactly what we need to be concerned about in the UK. But I don't get a feeling that, this kind of Pollyanna-ish approach by DCIT to new technology adoption, that they really understand that you actually have to have a sovereign capability in each of the different areas involved, basically, in AI development, in data sets, in supercompute, and so on. And in cloud services fundamentally. So, there's a lack of understanding, I think, that this is an end-to-end issue, and we need to actually approach each of those areas in a very concerted kind of a way. And I must admit, it absolutely baffles me why we aren't more advanced. You know, we keep talking about wanting to become a technology superpower. Well, frankly, we're way off beam if that's our ambition, quite frankly.
I mean, this, Nicky, this is literally, it's an issue of dynamism. The UK has just not been dynamic about technology. We've not got excited about it. We need to be excited about it. Look at the NHS, for example. The NHS has got this huge database. That is an enormously valuable database. If we could harness that, we could actually start to pay for the NHS. We could actually say with that NHS database, hey, let us use your data because it's in your interest. Couldn't we? Do you think we need to be more ambitious about all of this?
Well, it was only 2 or 3 years ago that one of the big four accountancy firms actually put a value on the NHS database, and off the top of my head, I can't remember what it was. Something like around 9 billion per year,
Yeah.
if it was sort of exploited correctly, and by correctly I also mean safely for the individuals concerned. But it certainly, from where I'm sitting, it appears that nothing has happened other than we paid Palantir £1 to do something. And Palantir is now kind of walking off with that. I'm not saying that the NHS hasn't put in proper, protections for individual citizens, but we do appear to be missing a trick at every single step of the game, and partly the I think the attraction of being able to come out with political sound bites around the inward investment and the sort of catalyzers from growth from large non-UK companies is something that successive governments have been unable to resist. I will also say, coming back to the impact on citizens and individuals. Yes, we had Microsoft say under oath that it couldn't keep data sovereign in the most, I guess, sort of true version of sovereign, e.g., the data is not subject to any form of foreign jurisdiction. But this has been going back for decades. So the late great Caspar Bowden, who was one of Microsoft's, he was Microsoft's chief privacy officer for EMEA back in 2010, 2011, when the Snowden scandal was at its peak, briefed 40 Microsoft or 40 countries, or the salespeople in 40 different countries, Microsoft salespeople. Actually, your customers' data is not going to be safe from foreign intrusion. And for that, he was sacked. So this has been a known thing for a long time, but we see successive governments not really caring about this. And in fact, we've now got the Data Use and Access Act is in force, and it will kind of dilute, for want of a better word, the conditions under which foreign data transfers can be made anyway.
The transparency is one of the issues that we have a real problem with. It's almost as if we have a cultural problem with that. Nicky's mentioned the Palantir issue, which in a sense was a kind of first sign of a real problem about the transparency of awarding contracts. They got a foot in the door. We had vendor lock-in with their Foundry software, which, it does the job. It joins up and makes NHS data interoperable, but others could have performed that who were not American companies with the kind of reputation that Palantir has in various fields. And now, of course, they've got the 400 million or so contract to do all the federated data platforms within the NHS, which does not help with public trust. And on the transparency front, we had a proposal, and copyright content is another form of data, another type of data set. We had the proposal to allow big tech under the AI copyright consultation preferred option, as it was, to make sure that you had to that the big tech companies could use copyright content without permission, unless artists and creators had opted out. Well, they've now taken away that as the preferred option, but nevertheless, it's created a huge amount of mistrust. And then again, when you think about the adoption of AI, particularly in places like local government, there should be a countervailing duty for the ordinary citizen to be aware that it is being used. I had a private member's bill, and this is one of my particular hobby horses, that tried to get much greater transparency when automated decision making, algorithmic decision making, if you like, which affects the citizen, is adopted in central or local government. Well, there was a very dusty response to that, because I believe there should be a register, there should be forms of redress for the individual citizen if the AI gets it wrong. And so on, but there seems to be no recognition of that. So we've got a real issue with transparency. Unless you get public trust, that is a hindrance to adoption, and we all want to see proper ethical adoption of AI tools, because it will increase productivity, and it may well be better, I may say this, with the right data, it may be better than human decision making. So I'm not I'm not a Luddite, I'm a tech optimist, but you can only do that if you have the right level of public trust and the right level of regulation around it at the same time. My book was published last year, Pete, and it's called Living with the Algorithm, Servant or Master, and it's about AI policy and governance. So I'm sure it'll be a good August read for everybody.
A real area that we need to consider is exactly where we're going with some of this. It's been around for so long. Nicky and the others have referred to things that happened back in the early 2000s, which were precursors to all of this. We've seen a UK industry come and go with UK Cloud, which failed to get recognised for the value it was providing in sovereignty. And again, we're facing the same problems going ahead. And what Tim has said about the full technology stack, I think, is entirely right. I mean, I was at an all-party parliamentary group the other day where we were talking about translation services. And if you're worried about what the police are doing, what the NHS is doing, what even the defence sector are doing, or the courts, it's even small services like this where they're putting a confidential witness statement into a translation device, which are all on American devices. And we talked about redress there, or Tim really recently referred to that. There is no process of redress on the mass surveillance that is conducted from the US, and that should be something that would keep us all concerned. But at the end of the day, I want to thank our guests and ask them to come back soon, because we look forward to seeing them again. And I hand back to you in the studio to say thank you, and on to the next programs in the near future.